Great. Thank you, Jim. Well, thank you everybody for joining again. Mr. Kamali, I think if it's okay with you, we'll go ahead and jump right in. Does that sound okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Sure.
So we are going to get started. We're really excited to speak with you today. Thank you for joining on Saturday morning. We're going to talk today about the Vision Zero Action Plan for the City of Mount Rainier. Before we jump in, I'd like to do quick introductions, starting with Mr. Kamali. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and Bill, and then also I'd like to recognize the council members that are here today. So Mr. Kamali?
Yes, good morning all. My name is Kurosh Lassan Kamali. I'm the city manager, and we started this project last year based on the direction of council, mayor and council, so contracted tool design to do a comprehensive study for the city's streets and sidewalk, the citywide, study that to make it safer, walkable, and bikeable, and have a healthier, community. So right now, today, we are here to have tool design to present their findings. And we are asking community to provide their feedback. Then we can finalize this plan. And later on, we're going to use this plan to go after the infrastructure money that is available, which is due on July 10. And we're working on the application with the tool design right now. And thank you so much, everybody, and appreciate your day.
Great. Thank you very much. And for the council members that are present here, I'd like to give you the opportunity to welcome the group and introduce yourself. Maybe we'll start with Luke. Yeah, please.
Sure. I think everybody should know me on the call. Luke Chesick, council member. Just appreciate all the residents coming out on a Saturday morning to give some of their time to provide their input on the study that Tool Design is going to walk you all through today. Appreciate Tool Design taking time out of their Saturday morning as well to be here. This is a big priority of mine, part of the vision I laid out in 2019, what I ran on in 2021, and just really excited to see us working towards a solution that's going to make our city more walkable and bikeable and just a nicer place to kind of walk through. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And Jared? Oh, you're on mute, Jared.
Thank you. Sorry, Jared Stoltzfus, council member for Ward 2. Just echo everything Luke's saying. This is we know that there's really opportunities to improve safety, biking, walking, pedestrian. There's opportunities to improve our infrastructure, and we really wanted to look at how to do so in a holistic way, taking into account all the residents and folks that also traverse through our city. So the study is a big part of that. Thanks to Tool for coming out this morning. Thanks to residents that have sent us feedback, come to earlier meetings, coming to this meeting, and any folks that if you didn't get a chance and you're watching a recorded version of this later, please send us your feedback as well. So just want to thank everyone again, and also want to mention I know Mayor Benitez is playing double duty this morning. She's about to jump on, but she'll be on in a sec. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Are there any other council members here this morning? Okay, great. And when the mayor joins, I will make sure to stop if she would like to provide some introductory remarks as well. Okay, so I'll introduce myself and my team, and then we will jump right in. So my name is Dan Goodman. I'm the project manager for this project. I'm also Tool Design Group's Mid-Atlantic Planning Director based out of the Silver Spring office. And I'm joined today by Jim Elliott, who's a senior planner on our Mid-Atlantic planning team, and Jay Swiderski, who's also a planner on our Mid-Atlantic planning team. And we're all based out of the Silver Spring office, which is Tool Design's headquarters. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. and we will jump right in. If somebody could please let me know when the mayor joins, I would appreciate it. Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, looks, and
Okay.
we've got the right version of the PowerPoint.
Okay, great. Well, so I'm going to start out by providing a quick overview of what we would like to talk about for the next 2 hours with you all this morning. And so we're going to start off by providing an overview of our study process. And then we're going to talk about our crash analysis findings. And so as part of this study effort, we've done a comprehensive analysis of crashes in Mount Rainier. And so we'd like to spend some time walking you through what we found, because it's going to be directly related to the types of projects that we recommend. We're going to talk about some policy options. We had a similar conversation with the City Council this week, and so we'd like to add some feedback, and we'll talk a little bit about what we heard from the City Council with you all as well. And we would really like to ask for your opinion and your input about which policies we should be focusing on as part of this effort. We're also going to talk about some potential projects. And again, what I want to emphasize is the connection between the crash analysis findings and the types of projects that we want to recommend in this effort. We'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion at the end, and we'll wrap up with a discussion of next steps in the study process. So I will start out by talking about an overview of the study process. And before I jump right in, I want to just provide a quick definition of Vision Zero, because that is a really important framing for this entire exercise. So what is Vision Zero? Vision Zero is an approach to transportation safety that accepts no loss of life or serious injury in our transportation system. So our goal is that no one is dying or being seriously injured while they're traveling in Mount Rainier. That is the entire purpose of what we are trying to accomplish in this effort. Everyone involved in transportation decisions shares responsibility to eliminate serious and fatal outcomes. That's another really important part of the overall Vision Zero approach. And so that means city staff and police and schools and the city council and residents and the state DOT. There's a broad range of stakeholders that need to be involved in this conversation and owning it collectively so that we can really eliminate unnecessary injury and death in the transportation network. I also want to emphasize that what we're talking about kind of in Mount Rainier is part of a broader effort that's happening around the world and also in the United States, across the United States. And it's a really exciting and important effort. And so Mount Rainier's part of that story is nested within a broader story, which is that the state of Maryland and Prince George's County both adopted Vision Zero in 2019. And the Montgomery County adopted a Vision Zero resolution in 2016. So this is an important part of that. The City Council adopted a resolution early in this process, which is part of kind of the framing of this effort as well. So this is a quick overview of the overall study process. And I want to point out a couple things about this effort, which is that the project started in late summer 2022. And we basically spent the fall doing extensive existing conditions analysis and doing a lot of public engagement and collecting a lot of feedback through a lot of different ways and venues. And so we did a community input survey between September and October. We've analyzed those results and summarized them in an existing conditions report. We had a public meeting in September And then we did a series of focus group meetings with pedestrian and bicycle advocates, with the Rainier Manor residents, one focusing on elementary schools, and one with the Mount Rainier Tree Commission. And so we did all of that, and we're incorporating all that information that we gathered in the fall into our study process and our recommendations moving forward. I do want to point out that the thrust of the project did change right at the end of the year. And so it started out as a sidewalk and bikeways master plan, essentially. And about halfway through, the city decided that it wanted to apply for what is known as Safe Streets for All federal funding, which is part of the infrastructure bill. It's national infrastructure funding to specifically focused on improving safety for everyone. And so we changed the second part of the study process to really orient towards a Vision Zero action plan, because that is part of the requirement to pursue SS4A federal money. And so that changed right around the new year. And then the city council adopted a resolution creating a Safe Streets Task Force. And that's basically what we've been doing for the last few months, is moving aggressively towards a Vision Zero action plan that we intend to finish by the end of June, so that the city can apply for the grant in July, which is sooner than we anticipated. We expected that it wouldn't be due until fall, and USDOT bumped that up. And so that's part of why we've got a pretty aggressive schedule that you see in front of you there. I mentioned that we had the second task force meeting this week. This is a public meeting, and then we've got another task force meeting at the end of May, and then also a work session and a legislative meeting with the city council. As I said, all geared towards a submittal of an SS4A grant in the middle of July. The last thing I'll say about the study process is that our efforts will continue over the course of the summer in July and August primarily, but those efforts are not contingent on the federal grant submittal. And so over the course of the summer, we'll be doing a traffic calming and safety toolbox, and then also some concept sketches for some specific projects. We'll reference those in the grant submittal most likely, but the actual concept ideas won't come until later. So I mentioned the public engagement that we've done so far. We did the community survey, we did the public meeting, we did all the focus group meetings, and then we've had 2 Vision Zero task force meetings so far. And then this is our public meeting. So I'll just point out a few things about the community survey as one example of the engagement that we've already done and that we're incorporating into our study process right now. And so this is just one example, and I mentioned that all of the results are summarized in an existing conditions report. But we asked the community kind of the top needs for bicycle access safety improvements. And so what you see on the right is a heat map that shows where respondents would like to see bicycle access and safety improvements. Some of the top needs also that were identified in the community survey were, cut through traffic, motorist speeding, and school-related needs. And so those are all things that you'll see very, very clearly delineated in all the policies and project ideas that we'll be discussing. This is another example focusing specifically on pedestrian access and safety improvements. And so we did ask for ideas on top locations for safety and access improvements for people walking. And we asked, what would you need in order to choose to walk rather than drive? And we've collected all that information. And what is shown on the screen is a heat map that shows where respondents would like to see pedestrian access and safety improvements. And one thing I want to point out and acknowledge is that this reflects the feedback of the people that participated in the survey. So it's one of many inputs that we're building into our study process. So another part of the planning context for this study, as everyone knows, is that Maryland SHA, the State Highway Administration, is also working on a big project on Queens Chapel Road, and so that's something that we are factoring into our study process. You'll see in the crash analysis findings that is one of the big problem locations. That's where crashes are occurring. And so the fact that SHA is wrapping up a project now is a really important development. That the improvements that they're doing as part of that project are gonna help the safety story, and so that's a really important part of what we're doing, and we want to fold in what we're doing into that thing that's already happening right now. I'll say just a few things about the changes that are coming as part of that project. And I'm sure a lot of folks here, everyone here probably has experienced the construction of that project. But I think that the positive side is what you see on the screen, which is a two-way stop on Russell Ave and a crossing signal at Buchanan are being replaced with a full traffic signal. There's an existing crossing signal on Queens Chapel Road at the Northwest Branch Trail, and so that's going to be upgraded and improved. There's a new rectangular rapid flashing beacon at Queens Chapel and 27th, which is going to improve the pedestrian crossing condition at that location. And then existing signals at Chilham Road are being replaced and upgraded. A few other important things about that SHA project on Queens Chapel Road. The speed limits are being reduced from 35 to 30. The crosswalks are being marked with high visibility crosswalk markings. The slip ramps are being removed at Queens Chapel and Chilham and 30th. And then bike lane widths are generally going to vary between 6 and 5 feet between 30th and Buchanan. So important multimodal safety improvements, things that will help the overall picture that you'll see in the crash analysis findings, and things that we intend to build on through the projects that we identify in this effort. So with that, I'd like to pass to my colleague Jay Swiderski to walk us through the findings of our crash analysis that are going to frame up our discussion of policy and projects that'll come next. So Jay.
Thanks. So just to start with, a note on our methodology. Sorry, next slide now. So we looked at data from Maryland and DC have open data portals. So we pulled down data on all crashes which occurred in the city of Mount Rainier or on the section of Eastern Avenue bordering the city. And various state and county sources about the roads where they occurred, such as how many lanes and so forth. Unfortunately, the DC crash data contains a lot less information than Maryland's, which is limiting our initial analysis, but we are going to try to go back and look more in depth at the Maryland data and make sure that we have as full a picture as we can get. But another critical limitation is that this data is based on police crash reports, which may miss a large number of, some number of crashes, but particularly those involving people walking or riding a bike, and especially people in certain communities who either don't trust police or don't feel that they can afford to call an ambulance, and so may try not to report that. And unfortunately, that means that we don't have the data about them. Another thing you'll notice is that the numbers that we're looking at here are actually pretty small, which is good. Does mean fewer people are being hurt, but they are also somewhat difficult to analyze and draw solid conclusions from. Next slide, please. So one of the things that jumps out is that the less severe crashes are the largest share, and most severe crashes are the lowest share of crashes. And in fact, there were 0 reported fatalities in the 5 years that we're looking at. Of the 785 total crashes recorded in the city of Mount Rainier and on Eastern Avenue. We had 21 crashes that were reported as serious injuries, 79 minor injury crashes, 66 where there was a possible injury recorded. And the DC data does not use this category, so it's probably a little smaller than we would expect. And then there were 619 crashes resulting in no recorded injury. The other thing to start off with is that, looking at them individually by year, 2020 and 2021 did have fewer crashes than the previous years, and they had fewer crashes that were serious injuries. But crashes were up slightly in 2021 over 2020, still fewer than the previous years. And a greater proportion of the crashes in 2021 resulted in serious injuries. And next slide, please. Looking at who is involved in these crashes, of the crashes are coded by the most vulnerable person involved. So if a crash involves several motor vehicles and one pedestrian, it is counted as a pedestrian crash. 93% of collisions in the city involve motor vehicles only. However, 43% of crashes which result in a severe injury involve at least one pedestrian. Motorcyclists are involved in only 2% of collisions, but 10% of those in which somebody is hurt. Next, looking at crashes per capita. Next slide, please, Dan. In a city of just about 8,300 people, 21 such crashes is about 1 for every 395 residents, or about 2.5 per 1,000 people. Travelers in their 20s and 30s were in a disproportionate share of crashes overall and of KSI crashes specifically. They are 27% of the city, but are in 51% of crashes and 67% of the crashes with KA outcomes, that is serious injuries crashes. It is difficult to know how many of those involved in crashes in the city are city residents, especially since the biggest roads and the locations of the majority of its crashes are major corridors which serve the entire region. But looking at, also another thing is, looking at who is involved in crashes in the city, people in their late 70s are one of the smallest groups in the city population. They're just 0.4% of the population, but 1.48% of crash persons, so people involved in crashes, which is a ratio of nearly 4 times out of proportion to their population. Another thing to note is that age data is not available for about 1/4 of people involved in crashes. So that may also affect our analysis here. Dan, did you want to pause? I saw that the mayor has joined us, so.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that the mayor has joined us and provide an opportunity either now or when we finish this section to provide welcoming remarks and say hello to the group. Mayor, would you like to say hello?
Hey, everyone.
Hello. Thank you for joining.
Double duty right now. Actually a community event right here in the city as well, but I'm stepping up and I'm following all the report as well. So welcome, and definitely would like to hear ideas, and thank you to the sign once again for taking on lead on this project, as well as our team, Mr. Kamali, as well as Councilmember Stofes and Luke, who are representing us, and the whole entire staff. So thank you, first of all, for the PTOs who are doing a great work getting the information. So I'll be here listening and looking forward to hearing more. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining. All right, Jay, back to you.
All right, so looking at what time of day and when during the week crashes are occurring, the largest proportion of crashes are occurring in the mid-afternoon. Between 3 and 6 p.m. had 21% of all crashes and 16% of serious injury crashes. However, late night and early morning crashes were more often severe. So while about 2.4% of those mid-afternoon crashes resulted in serious injuries, nearly 5% of crashes between 3 and 6 a.m. and nearly 6% of 12 to 3 a.m. crashes resulted in serious injuries. Looking at what day of the week, crashes were fairly evenly distributed across the week, but with a spike on Fridays. More severe crashes were concentrated on Fridays, Tuesdays, and Saturdays. And the lower number on Saturdays means that nearly twice as many of the crashes occurring on Saturdays were serious injuries. And that's the entire day on Saturday, so that does include incidents that might be considered late night on Friday night. Anything after midnight on Friday night, Saturday morning would be considered a Saturday crash. For vulnerable users, so that's our people walking, riding a bicycle or a motorcycle, nearly a quarter of all crashes involving these users occurred on Fridays, with another 20% on Wednesdays. And again, although fewer incidents occurred on Saturdays, nearly half resulted in severe injuries. Next slide, please. Looking at where in the city these are happening. So first, looking at intersections versus segments. Segments just being how we refer to the space between the intersections. Crashes were slightly more frequent at intersections. It's 54% of the total, but they are much more likely to result in serious injuries. 72.7% of serious injury crashes were at intersections. And so this means that while fewer than 2% of crashes between intersections resulted in a serious injury, nearly 4% of intersection crashes did. Looking at what kind of intersections, the majority of intersection crashes were places with no known traffic control, so neither a stop sign nor a signal. And what that may mean is if you're looking at an intersection, for example, where the side street may have a stop sign, but the main street may not. If you have the person on the main street has no traffic control, I believe is what this is referring to, because but intersections or crashes at signal intersections, places that have a red light, were 3.7 times more likely to be severe than those no control intersections, and 4.1 times more likely than at stop signs. Looking at speed, our posted speed limits are all either 25 or 35 miles an hour. And the higher speed roadways make up a much smaller share of the street network, but are a much higher share of crashes, and especially the significant injury crashes. Serious and fatal injuries were 78% more likely on 35 mile an hour roads. Fortunately, as Dan mentioned earlier, a significant chunk of the 35 mile an hour roads, which would be Queens Chapel Road, are being reduced shortly to 30 miles an hour. So hopefully that will have an effect. And finally, for this, a note that none of the crashes in which speeding was reported involved a user of a vulnerable mode, but it's very difficult to determine that somebody was speeding and in a way that can be reported in a crash report and potentially used in court. And so frequently this means that there wasn't enough evidence to say particularly to that speeding was a factor. Looking at functional classification, so local neighborhood streets versus primary and secondary roads. Local streets had the most and the highest number of KA crashes, but on secondary roads, which is Eastern and Chilham, a higher proportion of crashes were severe. And on primary roads, which is Queens Chapel and Rhode Island, a much higher proportion were severe. And for vulnerable road users, the local streets, the neighborhood streets had the highest number and share of significant injury crashes and the greatest risk of a crash resulting in a serious outcome. Looking at lane count and traffic volume data shows very similar results because the roads with multiple lanes and high traffic volumes are the same primary and secondary roads. Next, Dan. So we take these locations of where crashes have occurred and we do what's called a moving window analysis to draw a virtual window on the street a half mile long and then look at each 1/10 of a mile increment moving the window down the street, counting the number of crashes by severity and mode, and weighting those crashes by so that the KSI, what we call the fatal and severe injury crashes, occur or are weighted 3 for every 1 non-serious injury crash. And so that helps us concentrate particularly on the crashes that result in serious injuries. And looking at this, what we see is a particular concentration on Queens Chapel Road. This is for crashes involving only motor vehicles. Particular concentrations on Queens Chapel Road, on Eastern Avenue, and to a lesser degree on Rhode Island Avenue. And one thing to note is that because Queens Chapel and Rhode Island are divided, they have that hard median down the center. They appear in some of these analyses as if they were 2 separate roads. And so that may be why the Rhode Island is why Rhode Island shows as 2 lines here, and maybe why it may not be quite as bold a color on here as you might expect. Next, please. Looking at motorcycle crashes, again, we see a significant concentration on Queens Chapel Road, with a smaller concentration in the southern part of the city on Otis Street and 34th Street. And again, motorcycles were a smaller percentage of crashes, but a significantly higher proportion of KA crashes. Now, Dan, moving on to the bike crashes. Again, a major concentration on Rhode Island Avenue west of the Circle and on Eastern, and a smaller concentration on Chilham, and again, significantly outsized, significantly higher proportion of bike crashes resulting in serious injury than the crashes overall. Similarly for pedestrians. Next slide, please. Pedestrian crashes were 4.5% of all crashes, but over 40% of serious injury crashes. More than a quarter of pedestrian crashes resulted in a serious injury. And again, the concentration seems to be on Queens Chapel and Chilham roads, with smaller concentrations on Rhode Island and Eastern. We also looked at a heat map of all crashes in the city. And so you'll see, similarly, the concentrations and the significant injuries occurring primarily on Rhode Island Avenue and Queens Chapel and Chilham. And we wanted to include these next couple maps to show that, the largest numbers of crashes are occurring on these major roads at the edges of the city. But we do have incidents occurring really throughout the city. So this is the motor vehicle crashes are, spread across the city. Motorcycles in, a fewer number but particularly concentrated. And then bike and pedestrian also occurring throughout the city. Which leads also into the equity considerations, equity being a significant part of the Vision Zero framework and of the SS4A grant analysis. And these maps, which we also showed at the meeting in the fall, show where Mount Rainier's population in general is concentrated in the south, northwest, and especially the northern tip of the city, where households in poverty are concentrated in the north and particularly the northwest, and where people in the city don't have access to cars and are more likely to be walking, riding a bicycle, or taking transit. And that would be in the northwest and especially the northern part of the city. And so when we compare that with the crash density map, especially for pedestrians, we see that the pedestrian crashes are concentrated in the area where people, and particularly people who have no vehicle, are concentrated. And if we go next to, Dan mentioned the survey that we did earlier in the year showing where people would like to see access and safety needs. In many ways, that map doesn't match. And that doesn't mean that those areas aren't also problematic, but it does suggest perhaps we need to do better at hearing from people in the north and northwest part of the city. And I believe next is Jim for policy options.
And do we want to stop and allow people to ask questions at this point? And some questions have come in through the chat, and
Sure.
I imagine there are
we can
others.
do
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So one of the questions I wanted to acknowledge that came in through the chat, I don't know if people are monitoring it closely, is why we are reporting on fatal and serious injury crashes or referring to them together. And it's because a serious injury crash, in the context of Vision Zero, a serious injury crash is almost the same thing as a fatal crash, could easily have become a fatal crash. So when we say that there are no fatal crashes, but Jay keeps referring to fatal and serious injury crashes, that's why.
There's also the fact that, those numbers don't get updated if somebody's condition changes. So if, as we saw recently in DC, somebody is seriously hurt in a crash and dies several months later, that does not necessarily get updated in these statistics to reflect that the crash was eventually fatal.
Thank you, Jay. Jim, do you want to read any other questions that came in?
So there's a question about the finding that older adults were more likely to be involved in crashes, and question about whether any of those crashes were near Rainier Manor, and and I said that we could look into that. I don't think we have looked at specific crashes to understand the age of those who were involved, where we were looking at sort of things in aggregate. But we can look into that, and we did meet with Rainier Manor, and they shared with us their concerns about Queens Chapel and other areas in the northern part of Mount Rainier, and so we are well aware of some of the concerns there.
Thank you.
I see there's a question about how many responses did we receive to the survey. So there were over 500 location-based responses that we got to our community survey in the fall. So it was a pretty good response, I think.
Okay.
Although of course it was, you know, as Dan mentioned, not everybody responded, and we know that we got responses from certain demographics more than others.
We're hearing some beeping in the background, if you don't mind muting. Thank you. Is there one more question maybe that you'd like to put out there, Jim, or should we move on?
No, I mean, those are the questions that are in the chat. I think I captured
Okay.
them all, but I'm wondering if there's anybody who has a question in addition to what's already been answered about the
Okay.
crash analysis.
Yeah, great. We'll just offer this opportunity for anybody on the line based on the crash analysis that you've heard us talk about. Would anybody like to ask any questions verbally? And we can always come back as well. Okay, hearing none. What I want to move on to next is the policy options. And so we've talked about our study process so far. We've talked about a systemic safety analysis that we've done. And so now I want to move us into, okay, so what? And what do we change based on this information that we've gathered so far? And so part of that story is policies and programs to improve safety for everyone in Mount Rainier. And then the other part is the infrastructure part. And so we're going to start with the policy options, and then we'll talk about the project ideas. So Jim, I'd like to ask you to move us through some policy options, and I want to ask everybody in the line to continue to do what you're doing, which is enter questions and feedback into the chat. And we'd be happy to talk about that kind of as we go along. So Jim.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Next slide. So before we get into the policy options, we just wanted to provide a reminder of some of the key principles involved in what's called the safe system approach. And the safe system approach and Vision Zero are really synonymous. Vision Zero is sort of like a marketing term for the safe system approach. And as Dan mentioned, at the core of it is the idea that really no death or serious injury is acceptable in the transportation system. For a long time, we've operated as if they are, like it's an accident that happened, and so you just have to accept deaths and serious injuries as part of doing business, operating, a city, but that's no longer acceptable in this framework. The next principle is that humans make mistakes. It doesn't matter, how much you try to, educate them to do the right thing, and you emphasize individual responsibility. People will make mistakes, and it's important to account for that and design your transportation system with that in mind. A third principle is that humans are vulnerable in crashes. So we need to think about the forces that are involved in crashes and trying to minimize those so humans are not injured seriously or killed. Dan talked about how responsibility is shared, sort of in the model that Safe System is replacing. There was a real emphasis on the responsibility of the individual driver pedestrian, bicyclist. But this is saying that no, it's really a shared responsibility that involves a lot of different stakeholders. Safety is proactive. We don't just respond when a fatal or serious crash has occurred to make improvements. We think about characteristics that may lead to fatal and serious injury crashes in the future. We analyze those and we're proactive about addressing those. So even though we haven't had any fatal crashes, we haven't had many serious injury crashes, at least in the 5 years that we looked at. That is not, it's important to be proactive and think about where crashes may occur. And then finally, redundancy is crucial. So there are many systems that overlap one another, and they need to be redundant so that we're safe in the transportation system. Next slide. The safe system approach also includes a variety of elements. So one of those key elements is safe road users. And I think an important aspect of that is that we think about the safety of all road users, and the sort of the icon provided here indicates that. So not just people in vehicles and their safety, but also pedestrians, bicyclists, people with disabilities. We need to think about all road users, their behaviors, and their safety. Safe vehicles. So this is a recognition that the type of vehicle people use affects the safety of the transportation system. So this icon is showing a car and a bus. Typically, a public transit bus is a safer type of vehicle in terms of the number of crashes and the severity of crashes that that result from a crash involving a public transit bus. So we're trying to get people out of personal private vehicles and into public transit, into safer vehicles, into walking and biking. Safe speeds. It's the recognition that the speed at which vehicles travel has a direct influence, a very strong influence on the severity of a crash and the likelihood that a crash will occur in the first place. So there's an emphasis on lowering motor vehicle speeds. The safe roads element is focused on design of streets. We'll be talking about some individual projects later that we're thinking about. So this is kind of part of the shared responsibility aspect, that the design of roads, it's not just the way that people are driving, but how the design influences the way they're driving that's important. And then finally, post-crash care. So this is the idea that what happens after there has been a crash is also very important. And if that's not working as well as it could result in fatalities that wouldn't happen otherwise. Next slide. Okay, so we have developed some preliminary ideas based on the safe system approach elements that I just mentioned. And these are preliminary, and I'd be interested in people's feedback about these ideas. Maybe we'll save it until we get through all of these. But I just want to highlight that these are preliminary. So one idea related to safe road users is the idea of expanding the safe routes to school programs at each of the schools. Now we met with the Vision Zero task force earlier in the week and talked about what's currently happening at the schools, and sort of in the initial response, because I asked whether or not the schools had safe routes to school programs already. People weren't sure, but when we started talking about the types of activities that the schools were already engaged in, participating in walk to school days, for example, it emerged that in fact that the schools, Stone and Rainier Elementary, are engaged in a number of safe routes to school activities. So it could be a question of expanding those activities. And I should back up and really introduce what Safe Routes to School is. Safe Routes to School is a federal program that is locally administered to encourage and enable students in grades K through 12 to walk and bike to school. So it's focused exclusively on walking and biking safely to school, and approaches that goal from a number of different angles through improving infrastructure, through providing encouragement activities such as walk to school days, to pedestrian safety and bicycle safety initiatives for students. So it's a comprehensive approach to enabling students to walk and bike safely to school. So that's one idea. Okay, Dan, you're moving me on. All right. So
I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Feel free to take more time.
No. So there's one other idea is to expand beyond children and to do some safety education more broadly in the community, probably focused on drivers, because drivers impact traffic safety the most. This could be done as a broad scale media campaign. It could be done in a more localized way. So, for example, you may have seen the signs that are on this screen in DC. I've seen them in Maryland as well, which are aimed at informing people about DC's new 20-mile-per-hour speed limit and to slow down. This is kind of a location-based type of outreach campaign, or can be, because you could place these signs like this in a school zone or near a school zone, for example, and try to better inform drivers of the need to slow down and drive safely. So that's another idea. Next slide. Okay, so another element of the safe system approach, as I mentioned, is safe vehicles. So there are a variety of things that you can do here to improve the safety of the vehicles that are on the roadway. One is for city-owned vehicles, or vehicles that are operated by city contractors, and we understand that from the Vision Zero task force that the city may not have much leverage over contractors. But to require them to have side underrun guards, and there's a photo of what that is on the right. It's something that the District Department of Transportation is exploring, and it's a barrier on the underside of a truck to prevent a bicyclist or pedestrian from being trapped underneath the truck as it makes a turn. That's the main goal. So that's one thing that could be done. Another thing that could be done is to discourage large SUVs and trucks. In addition to speed, the size of the vehicle, the weight of the vehicle, and the profile of the vehicle has a significant impact on traffic safety. So vehicles that are heavier, that have a higher profile, hit you when they strike you as a pedestrian at a higher location where your vital organs are more likely to result in serious injury and death. So one of the reasons why we've seen a spike in pedestrian fatalities over the last 10 years nationally is the increasing use of SUVs and trucks. So the idea here is to discourage those types of vehicles in favor of smaller, safer vehicles. One way to do that is to use smaller vehicles as part of the city fleet. Another way to do that might be to charge people higher parking permit rates for larger vehicles. Larger vehicles also take up more curb space, so there's an element of fairness there. One thing that I know that has been a big conversation in the community, and is another idea that we're considering incorporating into the Vision Zero action plan, is to discourage through physical traffic calming diversion, signage, and automated traffic enforcement for oversized vehicles. So we know that the city is currently doing some work on that. There's a project at the intersection of 31st and Perry that is intended to discourage through truck traffic, and we know that's important to the community. Another is to implement policies that encourage a shift away from private motor vehicle use to safer and more sustainable modes. So that could be a variety of different things. It could be making walking, biking, using alternative forms of transportation or sustainable forms of transportation more convenient and accessible to people. Next slide. Safe speeds, I mentioned that's really critical in the safe system approach. So an idea here related to that is to reduce speed limits throughout the city on all local roads to 20 miles per hour. DC recently did this. It's something that Mount Rainier can do. My understanding from the Vision Zero Task Force is that this has been explored and it's been determined that this would be possible. Another idea is to expand the area within which school zone speed limits are applicable. There are certain rules about school zone speed limits and school zones, but the school zones that are in Mount Rainier are relatively small and could be expanded even with those rules. A third idea is to implement automated speed enforcement in school zones and in residential neighborhoods. Baltimore City, as you can see in the screen clip on the page here, has recently launched 4 new speed cameras in school zones. There's a law that enables cities, if they pass legislation to enable it, to install school zone speed limit automated enforcement. Next slide. Safe roadways. This is something that I think Dan will put some meat on the bones of, but these are the bigger picture ideas of strategies that the city might take to improve the safety of its roadways on a more kind of systemic basis. So one would be to implement what are called gateway treatments at Mount Rainier entry points. And gateways can be configured in a variety of different ways, but the goal of the gateway is to signal to drivers particularly that they are entering a different kind of zone. So that can be done with curb extensions, medians, signage, and other elements. And there are a variety of locations in Mount Rainier where that might be effective. One of them is related to the photo that is shown on the screen here. That is Chillum Road, not too far from Queens Chapel Road. That's an important gateway into the city where we're coming from Chillum Road north of Queens Chapel, which is a 4-lane road and as currently configured quite a fast road, to a different kind of environment where you've got apartment buildings, and we know that quite a number of crashes are occurring on Chillum Road south of Queens Chapel, so this would help address that. Another idea is to implement what's called intersection daylighting measures at all intersections. So the goal here is to improve sight lines between pedestrians and cyclists and drivers. Oftentimes there are cars parked near intersections that can block those sight lines. So this would it could be accomplished through a number of different methods. The key ones being implementing parking restrictions near intersections and or implementing curb extensions. Third idea is to require high visibility crosswalks wherever marked crosswalks are installed. High visibility crosswalks are crosswalks that have the thicker transverse lines. Sometimes they're configured as a ladder. So actually the crosswalk that is in this photo here is similar to a high visibility crosswalk. The lines are not as thick as we would like to see them, I think, but these crosswalks are different from the traditional parallel line crosswalk, and they're more visible, so they help to highlight where pedestrians are crossing. Oftentimes at intersections, not all pedestrian crossings are supplied with a marked crosswalk. So another idea is to as a matter of policy, install marked crosswalks wherever there are pedestrian crossings, not just on one of 4 legs or 2 of 4 legs, but all 4 legs at an intersection. A fourth idea is to evaluate and update lighting, especially at intersections and pedestrian crossing locations. Lighting is really important for traffic safety, and it's something that often gets doesn't get enough attention. So this idea would be to evaluate key crossing locations throughout the city and upgrade lighting at those locations if it's needed. Another idea is leading pedestrian intervals and no right turn on red. Leading pedestrian intervals are installed at signalized intersections, and they give pedestrians who are crossing a head start to cross at the crosswalk, so that they're in the intersection before cars start turning, and this makes them more visible. We know that it improves safety. And the same goes for no right turn on red restrictions. We've talked about safe routes to school programs. An idea here would be to prioritize when thinking about what improvements need to be made in the city, routes to schools and to parks. Couple more ideas, developing a sidewalk repair and replacement policy. So we understood through the community survey that was a concern of residents, that some sidewalks were in poor repair. Now, the question may come up, how is this related to safety? It came up in our Vision Zero task force conversation, and it's related to safety in that when you have a sidewalk that is in poor repair, it can result in a trip and fall situation that especially in the case of an older adult, can result in a serious injury for them. And those types of injuries, I should say, are not the types of injuries that are captured in the data that we evaluated. That's important to understand. So Jay mentioned that the data we had was limited to police reports. A person who falls and injures themselves severely on the sidewalk is not going to show up in that data. So that's one way that it affects safety. Another is if a sidewalk is not accessible, it may prompt somebody to walk in the roadway or to roll in their wheelchair in the roadway, which brings them into contact with motor vehicle traffic and could result in a crash. So that's another important consideration. And then finally, as part of all of this, and I think we understand that this is very important for the city, to think about ways that green infrastructure can be incorporated into any type of improvement that is made throughout the city to address safety. So, and then the final issue is post-crash care. So this is what happened after a crash has occurred. Of course, we want to focus on preventing crashes from occurring in the first place, but we also want to recognize that they may happen and that the way that we respond to those crashes can affect whether a person dies or lives. And so one of the ways that we can improve post-crash care is doing a better job of reporting and analyzing information about crashes. So that's one idea for the city. Another is providing training to first responders, such as police officers, on how to manage crashes better. And so those are the elements associated with the safe system approach and some of the policy ideas that we've developed to address them. And I'm interested in what people think about these ideas. Do certain ideas resonate with you? Is there something missing from here that you think would be important for the city to pursue in the future? I'm interested in hearing from people.
So please feel free to unmute and just let us know. And while we do that, Jay, maybe you can just look through the comments and see if there's a few that you'd like to lay out there next. But let's first open it up. It looks like Hannah Grissar.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm curious about any evaluation,
Your
especially of
camera
lighted
might not be exactly right if you want to bump it up.
Maybe that'll help.
Whoop, now you're upside down.
No, it'll
Oh,
fix.
there you are.
we go.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
And is the mic better now?
Yep,
Yes.
it's fine.
Okay.
Yep.
Was the absence of any left turn signals evaluated, specifically at Rhode Island Avenue and Eastern, both directions, and 38th and Rhode Island Avenue, and even now at kind of Arundel and Eastern, where they've reconfigured all those lights in the last few years, and it's just very complicated to kind of navigate all that cross traffic.
Yeah, that's a good point. When we don't have dedicated left turns, sometimes people, I'm thinking about this from a pedestrian safety perspective, but there's also a driver safety perspective too. But what happens in those situations is that drivers will be paying attention to oncoming traffic and will, gun it to get across opposing traffic, and will not see a crossing pedestrian. So that is a significant safety issue. We haven't looked specifically at the signal timing of those intersections yet, but it's a good point.
And the ones you mentioned were Arundel and Eastern, and then what were the two on Rhode Island? Oh, you're on mute now.
38th and Rhode Island, which I feel I'm experiencing a lot more traffic now. Maybe that's because of the mixed food hall and development there, but it's much harder to get out there now. Rhode Island and Eastern, and Arundel and Eastern.
Rhode Island and Bunker Hill.
In Rhode Island and Bunker Hill.
In
Okay.
Bunker Hill, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can take a look at those
Yeah.
in particular.
And also the length of the light, especially at Eastern and Rhode Island Avenue. I mean, it can take, just to go straight through in both directions to cross Rhode Island Avenue, it can take 2-3 cycles to get through that light. And I think that contributes to a lot of the cut through on 34th Street. So they cut through and then come out on Rhode Island Avenue at the circle, which had a lot of red on your maps when you were showing like, why is that there? And I think it has to be a huge contributor because traffic will back up, all the way to there and past to kind of just to cross Rhode Island.
But also keep in mind that the four corners on Rhode Island and Easter Avenue belong to DC. That's one of the reasons that Maryland cannot do anything unless DC cooperates with us.
Mhm.
That's
Right.
the issue. The four corners, the same on Easter and Rhode Island, and Easter and Bunker Hill, they belong to DC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think, we also want to address in this plan the fact that a lot of the most severe crashes are occurring on Eastern Avenue and other roads that are not managed by the city of Mount Rainier. So the plan that we're developing will address them and serve as a way for the city of Mount Rainier to engage with DC and with SHA in Maryland.
And that interjurisdictional coordination, you're absolutely right to highlight that as a critical thing.
Yeah,
So let's go with Judy Alba, a question.
Thank you. Yes, I had the same concern, and I had posted it in the chat about the intersection of Rhode Island and Eastern Avenue.
Mhm.
It is, for years, it's just amazing that the intersection traffic light has not been addressed with the DC government. It's just something that I don't think I think there is a lot we can do with the DC government to improve that, because it concerns both cities. And so it's not impossible to work with them and address this as soon as possible, because it's been years that that intersection has been a problem. And also just before that intersection is Perry Street, and on the rush hour, there is the cutoff that hundreds of vehicles do at the rush hour going into Perry and then cutting off through the back alley. And I just posted also, we have observed, we live in the corner of 38 and 31st and Perry.
Mm-hmm.
So we see the situation constantly with the trucks coming, and also children playing after school right there with their balls. And then these vehicles coming very fast to go to the back alley to cut precisely that the left turn intersection on Rhode Island and Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a tragedy waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that needs to be addressed. We had floated ideas among neighbors that making it a one-way, making Perry one-way towards Eastern instead of allowing the cutoff. So that is an important thing that needs to be looked at.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no such heavy traffic through the back alley.
Great, thank you for that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I think there was somebody who's raised their hands that hasn't spoken yet. So let's go to Charles. And then we'll come back to you, Mario. I don't quite hear you yet. I think we're.
Charles, your mic may be
I don't know if the
disabled
mic
on
is
your
working
end.
for Charles. Let's give Charles a minute. Let's go to Matt. And then we'll come back to Mario. Sorry about that. Matt?
Hi. Yeah, thanks for this presentation. I think you mentioned it, but I was just wondering to what extent parking policies could be used to get some of the desired outcomes. I know in like cars on the street can be good in the sense that they're narrowing the traffic lane, but also it could be like an issue for people trying to use the street. So I know in North Mount Rainier, there's a lot of street parking just with the apartment complexes. I think probably charging for a parking permit or something like that. So I was just wondering what sort of policies are available through parking. And I think I saw the setbacks at the intersection for parking. I think that's a great idea that could be pursued. But I was just interested in hearing more there.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the key ones. Another thing I mentioned as an idea is potentially tying the parking permit fee to the size of the vehicle and charging more for larger vehicles as a way of, quantifying actually the space that those vehicles are taking up, but also encouraging smaller vehicles.
And just to add on that, another thing I'll talk about in the next part is strategically placing parking in order to have a traffic calming and speed management benefit. And so that's something that is also a possibility. Or using parked cars as a way to make it more comfortable for people biking. And I'll talk about a couple ideas for that as well. Let's go to Mario, and then I'm going to ask us to move along to the next part of the presentation, and we'll have more time also for comments and feedback. Mario, did you have one more?
Do we want to also try Charles again? I think he might have resolved his.
Yeah, let's go Mario first, and then let's go back to Charles.
No, I just want to mention that I guess like a month ago we had a meeting with a new city council from Ward 5, which is across our neighborhood, and we had a walk through Easter, and we told him about the issues with the lights and the speeding along Easter. So maybe I guess you might want to talk to somebody at Mount Rainier City Council, because they might have the information about the new council person from Ward 5. When he was here, we met with him, and we met with one of our county councils too. They were here. So I guess what I'm trying to say is just, I guess DC has information about the DC council person that you might want to contact him directly to.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, we saw that walk was happening, and that's a really important thing. And so yeah, we can follow up and try to gather that information coming out of that engagement opportunity.
Thank you.
So I think Julia, we've got. Let's see if the mic is working for Julia now.
Charles.
Hopefully.
Oh, Charles, yeah.
There it is.
There is great. Okay.
Hey, thanks for doing this. I appreciate all your hard work. So a couple comments just from a driver's point of view. I want to be careful that with all the plans that we're implementing, we're not like increasing road rage, or tendencies to cut through elsewhere in town. I think the propensity of drivers to cut through is always going to be there. And I think the left turns off of Eastern on those major corridors is really important.
Okay.
On Route 1 to make it one lane that's supposed to be more pedestrian friendly has driven me as a driver to drive through Hyattsville. So I think that's a very real thing that's going to happen. And I just want to make sure that all the plans are really carefully considering that and where is the traffic going to go, because the truth is that the cars aren't going to go away. For instance, I'm very pro environment. I would love to be able to walk and bike everywhere, but I have 2 children and like I can't bike everywhere I need to go. You can't arrive sweaty to a place of work if you're working out of the house. I mean, cars are essential to where we live. Everything we need is not located in Mount Rainier. So I just want to be really careful that as we're considering all of these design aspects, we really are also considering how the cars are going to get there, because I don't think they're going to go, they can't go away given our current location. So that is it.
That's great.
Thank you.
And yeah, and it's certainly a balance that we're seeking. And I think it's generally kind of widely acknowledged, that there is going to be a need to drive around Mount Rainier and through Mount Rainier. I think one of the things that we're focusing in on is having that access for driving and for motor vehicles, but lowering the speed so that you can still get where you need to go by car, but that it makes it less likely that a crash will happen. And if a crash does happen, less likely that it will be fatal. And so I think that's a really important thing to note. But totally agree that access needs to be maintained, and that many people can't make that choice to do something other than driving until it feels safer and more comfortable, and that will take time. And so hopefully what you see in the project ideas are moving us in that direction, where we're better meeting the needs of all users, including drivers, but then also the people that are walking and biking and taking transit. So Charles, I think Julia and Charles might be in the same household. So has Charles had a chance to speak yet? Or was that good with Julia?
That was it. I was the one who wanted to speak in the household.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to recommend that we move along because I want us to talk about some specific ideas for projects. And then we will come back also and have a little bit of time to come back to any topics that we missed. So I'm going to move us along, and you can still see my screen, correct? Okay, great. So the first thing I want to point out, so we've talked about the study process. We've talked about the crash analysis findings. We've talked about the policies and program ideas. So those are all kind of part of the story. Another really important part of the story is actual projects on the ground that can achieve the things that we're trying to achieve in this effort, everything that we've talked about so far. One of the things that we want to do as we're thinking about what those projects are is to build off of the things that are already happening, that are underway or planned, that we can build on to actually kind of start to create more of a safe multimodal network. And so we've talked about SHA's Queens Chapel plan, but I also want to acknowledge and point out that there's an Arundel Road Green Street project improvements that are planned. There's intersection improvements at Bunker Hill and 34th, and then there's Perry Street, 31st Street intersection improvements. And so those are things that that are coming that we want to build off of as part of the projects that we think about moving forward. And so I guess before I move on to the first thing, I want to mention a couple things that we're trying to accomplish with these projects. Number one, improving building off of existing projects. The most important thing is improving safety. We also want to tee up sets of projects that would be appealing to the US DOT decision makers when they decide who gets SS4A money. And so that's also part of the story that we're trying to suss out, is the projects that help us achieve all of the different outcomes. And so the first piece that I want to mention, and you'll see a hashed box around each of kind of the types of projects. I'm going to talk about 5 of them. So the first one is Chillum Road between the Metro Access Trail and Queens Chapel Road intersection. So I'll talk a little bit about this concept of a road diet. What that means is a roadway reallocation. The concept that I'll show a picture of is whether we could go from 4 travel lanes, 2 in each direction, to 3 travel lanes, and then better utilize that existing space to meet the needs of all roadway users, like we've talked about. That would improve West Hyattsville Metro Rail Station access condition. And as part of that, we think there's an opportunity to significantly improve pedestrian safety, potentially to provide separated bicycle facilities. Access management is part of the idea. It's basically the idea that for every single driveway along a corridor, those are potential conflict points between a pedestrian walking along a sidewalk and a motor vehicle. And so there may be opportunities to consolidate and combine driveways so there's fewer potential conflict points. We've also talked about green infrastructure. And so I'm going to walk through a few different slides to talk about this section and show some pictures of what I was just talking about. I do want to acknowledge, though, that we haven't designed any project yet. And so this is trying to lay out what a project would look like and some of the opportunities that we see, while also acknowledging that we're going to stay at a pretty high level as part of this study effort, and that more of the design would have to come later, the more of the design details. But this is the section of road that you all know well, I'm sure. This is where the metro comes out from West Hyattsville. There's 2 lanes in each direction. There's a pedestrian and bicycle crossing with a crosswalk. But when we think about kind of, that overall space, one of the things that really stands out is how much of the overall roadway width is dedicated to motor vehicle travel, and what that leaves for everybody else. When you dedicate all of that space for 2 lanes in each direction, how small that sidewalk is, how there's no, dedicated bicycle facilities. And if you could, and we haven't done a full detailed traffic analysis, but in our initial kind of assessment, it looks like it's possible to go from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. And then, like I said, that would allow us to reallocate some of that space. So this is just kind of driving towards Queens Chapel Road, and I'll just point out the the driveway condition that I talked about with all those driveways, some of them right next to each other on one property has multiple driveways. No matter what we do on the pedestrian accommodation, if there's that many turning cars, it can be pretty difficult. And so ideally we would try to consolidate some of those, but we also know things like a car wash that exists there, there's going to be a lot of movement in and out of that space, and that's a use that we just have to acknowledge and recognize and try to design around. So this is, there's destinations on both sides and there's not a lot of pedestrian crossing opportunity. And so I'll mention that another really important reason to try to consolidate the number of travel lanes is that it opens up space for things like a pedestrian refuge island, so that even if there's not a signal, a pedestrian has a place to get halfway across and then assess the safety of then making the next crossing. And that's something we know through the research and just general kind of research, which is that the longer a pedestrian is exposed to a crash, the more likely it is that they're going to get hit. It sounds pretty obvious, but if we can provide a pedestrian refuge island, it reduces that exposure, which can have a really important safety outcome. And so this is then turning around and looking the other direction. And so you can see the 4 lanes, and if we can go to 3, potentially with a 1 lane in each direction and a center turn lane with pedestrian crossing, there's the chance that you could have dedicated separated bicycle facilities, so a bike only facility on the side of the road that has a vertical separation between the cars traveling and the bike lane, which is different than a traditional bike lane. So in this case, it would be better if we can to have a dedicated separated bike lane. The other thing I want to point out about that is not everybody bikes, and for people that are biking, it's going to be much more comfortable, and we know now that it is going to be safer with a separated bike lane. But another benefit, if you think about a separated bike lane along the side of the road, is that it provides more lateral separation to the pedestrians also. And so people walking on that sidewalk will have a more comfortable experience if there's a separated bike lane there on the side of the road. And that's also a really important consideration. So that's a first potential project idea. And maybe I'll pause for a second, see if folks want to weigh in on that concept or that idea and provide any feedback on the basic idea.
And we have some, maybe Jay is going to say the same thing, but we had some questions in the chat. Okay. So one is by bicycle facilities, do you mean dedicated bicycle lanes along the roadway?
Yes. Yep.
And then there's a comment about the East Coast Greenway and Arundel Road, and should take into account and show off, enhance the connectivity to nearby bike trail infrastructure. Yep. So those are the 2 comments that we got while you were speaking.
Okay. Great. Well, it's a nice segue to my next slides because we'll talk about both of those things. So now building off of that, the second potential kind of set of projects that we're thinking about is that as Chillum crosses Queens Chapel and comes into Mount Rainier, really focusing on traffic calming and speed management for that entire stretch of Chillum and then 34th. And I'll show you some ideas of how that could be achieved. But again, the idea is still providing that access, but trying to slow down the speeds for everyone. We see a really important opportunity to improve the crossing of the Levee Trail. That's a really difficult crossing of that trail. And so that could be part of this overall project. The Thomas S. Stone Elementary School improvements, that's what's kind of indicated in this white box. And the idea is that you treat that segment right in front of the elementary school differently, and you do everything you can do to make sure that when a driver comes into that segment, they know that something changed. And so one concept for that is kind of the gateway idea that you potentially have something like a small traffic circle, curb extensions, maybe some automated speed enforcement even right there, to make sure, again, that as you go there, you realize that something changed, and then intuitively you choose to slow down because you're in a spot where you've got particularly vulnerable pedestrians. There's the 34th Street and Rainier Avenue intersection. We see some opportunities for green infrastructure there. Also, just kind of recognizing that it's slowing the entire corridor down when we have these nodes of more constrained physical space. There's a planned improvements at Bunker Hill and 34th, so that'd be part of this story. And then there's obviously the traffic circle at Rhode Island Avenue. There's some potential opportunities to improve, just tweak that to make it function safer. We've got some ideas for that. I'll just run through a couple slides to talk in a little bit more detail about that section. So this is, you've already crossed Queen's Chapel as you're coming into Mount Rainier. And the thing I want to point out here is just how direct and straight line that is. That kind of dynamic is what can encourage speeding, because there's nothing stopping you and you can kind of zone out. And we know that this kind of situation can make it easier to choose to speed or not realize that you're doing it. And so one opportunity that we'd like to explore is alternating the on-street parking, potentially to push it between the two different sides in order to create a small meander effect or a lateral shift for people driving. And that would just, again, intuitively force you to slow down in order to navigate a small weave using the on-street parking, so that you're still providing that parking for the people that need it, but that you're trying to slow down motor vehicle traffic. These are a couple graphics that kind of show you kind of what this looks like. And in this case, it's green infrastructure. It could be a combination of both green infrastructure and parking on different sides of the roads. Again, so that there's a little bit of movement that has to happen. You can also do a more focused, we call it a neck down, where you come through a spot and you just realize that it got pretty tight. And that just forces you to slow down and modify your speed. Again, not because a sign told you to, but it's because the physical environment is intuitively helping you make the decision that we want you to make, which is to slow down. I want to point out, this is just an example in the local area. This is in Tacoma Park on Ritchie Avenue. It's a location where they've done this kind of thing, and it's been pretty successful. And so you can see on the screen that there's green infrastructure, there's stormwater management, and then there's parking on different sides. And so this is a case where if you're driving here, you realize that there's a tight spot and you have to do a little bit of weave, and everybody still has access, but you can't just fly down that road anymore the way that you used to. It's also a place where cut through traffic, I believe, used to be bad, and I think that was part of the motivation for this. This is the trail crossing of the Levee Trail. I think everybody knows this very well. I think there are some challenges to this, but to us, it just feels like there's got to be a crossing improvement there, a potential opportunity for some kind of neck down effect to slow everybody down, but also potentially we'd want to look at some signalization there as a possibility. This is the stretch in front of the elementary school. And so again, it's that straight unencumbered view that we want to deal with. And the fact that when you're driving, you may not even realize that you just went by an elementary school, and we don't want that to be the case. And so there's opportunity for improvement there, but acknowledging also that it's pretty constrained. And so you don't have as many options as you might like, given the physical dynamic. But at this intersection, on one side of that corridor, it does seem like there's an opportunity for some of that gateway effect, so that as you're driving that direction, you would know that you just something changed right as you kind of entered that space that would slow you down. So that's the second idea. Yeah, it looks like we've got some good feedback coming in as well. The third one is something that I think that came in the comments as well, Arundel Road. We know that there is a planned project from 34th to 31st. And so that is a green street, green infrastructure project. And so the idea on this would be to continue that and to try to extend it all the way out to Eastern. This is the East Coast Greenway route is around this section. And so an improvement here could be helpful for that. Traffic calming, potentially separated bike infrastructure, and definitely green infrastructure is something that we see a lot of opportunity for that. And what I want to point out is just when you look at Arundel, I think this is looking towards Eastern, how wide it is, and that's something that I think everybody knows that has navigated this stretch of street. And so as we think about it, we want to try to constrain that roadway width in a way. One idea would be to have one narrow lane going in each direction of motor vehicle travel, way more delineated than what is now just kind of a wide open expansive pavement, but nudging the parking, potentially keeping the parking, but nudging it towards the center. So that you could maybe provide a separated bike lane that is along the sidewalk, that is along the curb with the cars bumped out. Again, we haven't done the full kind of a design exercise of this. It is pretty limited. There's a chance you would have to adjust that curb if it's not quite wide enough to get it within the existing curbs, but this is really an instance where the federal funding could make a big difference, because if the city can get federal SS4A money for something like this, moving the curb might be more possible, and funding it might be, it's going to be more expensive to do that. But a separated bike lane that is parking protected would be, I think, a much more desirable facility. And so you'd have a bike lane that was protected by the parked cars, essentially. And this is something that you can see in DC in a lot of different locations where they made this change in order to slow down traffic, but also provide dedicated bike facilities. The fourth project is the idea of a bike boulevard along 31st Street. And so what a bike boulevard is a designated route with a lot of wayfinding and a set of different design treatments that show you that it is a comfortable, desirable place to bike for all users. And so it includes a whole series of interventions, and I'll show on the next slide some ideas for that. But the idea is that you're finding a really good route, and then you're making it even better through things like intersection improvements in particular. And so that would include improving the connection up to Queens Chapel Road, maybe as part of the road diet on Chilham Road that I talked about, but then allowing somebody to come straight from Chilham Road straight down into a bike boulevard on 31st with some improvements on Arundel and Upshur, something that we've talked about, and pushing out into the bike network in DC, also potentially along Bunker Hill. And these are some graphics of what I was talking about, of the kind of tools in the toolbox for a bike boulevard. So things like intersection improvements with curb extensions, small landscape traffic islands, potentially even a raised intersection, the neck down and a raised crosswalk, the treatment that encourages a kind of lateral shift for people driving, or just a full regular neck down without a grade change, are things that you would design along 31st Street in a cohesive way so that it really reads as a desirable and safe bicycle facility. There is topography issues on 31st, as you know, but those exist on a lot of those north-south streets. So there's not a great way to get around it. If you know a way to avoid hills on that north-south connection, please do let us know. I'm sure there's a way. Okay, I'm going to do two more, and then I'm going to stop for feedback. The other one, the fifth one, is acknowledging the important role that Bunker Hill Road plays. And so looking for a way to really improve that connection, specifically for bicycle access. Bunker Hill, as it crosses Eastern, becomes a really important connection into the DC network. And on the other side, potentially helping us get a connection over to the Rhode Island Avenue trolley trail or in some other way to push the other direction as part of the Bunker Hill improvement. But it would be taking advantage of what's already planned at Bunker Hill and 34th, and then potentially really focusing on that Bunker Hill Eastern Ave intersection, in part in response to the safety analysis, but then also to try to facilitate that connection to the DC bike network. And then the last thing I want to say is kind of a separate bucket or batch of improvements, what we're calling kind of systemic safety improvements. And that would be where we would say, as part of this project, as an example, we're just going to make no turn on red at all of the signals at the same time, because we know through research that prohibiting right turn on red is a way to improve pedestrian safety. And so rather than doing it in a one-off way and just trying to do one at a time, just going and doing them all at the same time. Leading pedestrian intervals are another thing that you could do all at the same time relatively quickly. High visibility crosswalks, we've heard really positive feedback about the idea of intersection daylighting. And so that's really in a focused systemic way, basically looking at every single intersection and coming up with a program to just improve those consistently over time. And how you improve that through daylighting is pulling back the parking from the intersection in order to provide better visibility from people driving to pedestrians crossing. As an example, that's a really important systemic safety improvement. Also, things like lighting and speed limits are an important part of that. So those are the projects that I wanted to throw out there as 5 specific kind of bundled projects that we do think would be well received when the federal folks are looking at kind of the types of improvements that they want to support through SS4A. And then also systemic improvements that are things that you would do, as I said, in one big batch all at the same time, ideally, so that you just make a big significant safety improvement in a short amount of time. So with that, I want to stop and see if folks have feedback on that set of projects, and if there are significant things that you'd like to make sure gets raised up. Looks like Matt's got a question, and then let's go to Mark.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I'm curious about the 31st Street Bikeway, particularly on the north end. It seemed like it connected over to 30th Street. Yeah, if you go to that slide, like just west of the Nature Center, I feel like that's like a really critical part and also a confusing part for pedestrians and cyclists, because there's like a huge intersection. It's just confusing, like who has the right of way and all this sort of stuff. So I don't know if that's part of the plan. It looks like it kind of is, but I think that area there, sort of connecting, north of Arundel to the whatever network happens up there, would be really important to nail down. And then I just wanted to note that there's like a West Hyattsville Queens Chapel sector plan that's in a draft phase by the county. I think it's a plan. There's nothing binding to it really, is my understanding, but it overlaps with that area as well. So to the extent that these project proposals complement that might be something worth noting.
Okay.
So one thing.
We've looked at that. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say, one thing I will note is that the current work on Queens Chapel Road is going to include improvements to that intersection at 30th and Queens Chapel, as well as some new signals at both 30th and Buchanan, which should help with some, calming a little bit that traffic. And I believe there's also some better sidewalks and bike lanes along Queens Chapel. One of the other things, as Dan said, we haven't moved as far as, specifics of what these potential projects might include. But one other possibility is improving the connection right along the edge of the Nature Center property so that people could get from 31st and 30th to Buchanan and Chilham without having to go to Queens Chapel Road.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I just want to emphasize it's like the intersection of 30th and Allison is the one which I think turns into 31st. That's the one where it's just like
right here.
Yeah, it's just really it's kind of a mess. But yeah, that all sounds great.
Okay. I think we had at least one more hand up, but I don't see it now. Yeah, Mark. Yeah.
I wanted to thank you guys for your terrific work. It's really impressive. Here's a relatively limited question about the levee crossing area. Could you put that slide up?
Sure. Yeah.
If you're coming on the trail from the left and want to cross the street, if you go directly across to where the trail directly continues, the blacktop that you can see right in front of that guardrail, that part of the trail leads nowhere. It takes you to a stop where you have to either climb over or lift your bike over a guardrail at the sidewalk, as opposed to hooking up with the Charles Armentrout I guess it's the Northwest branch part of the bike trail. So what I find myself doing is crossing the street, making a left turn to cross the river, and then getting on the portion of the trail that's on the other side of the river, which does directly connect up with Charles Armentrout.
You do a jog. So you're saying you come up here, you cross, then you go across
the sidewalk's extremely narrow there, which is another problem, which I don't understand why they built the bridge quite that way without widening it at the time they improved it. But that's a hinky little situation. Anyway, and probably way beyond the scope of what we're doing, because it looks like to make that work would take a lot of effort. But if you wind up spending resources on that crossing only to allow walkers and bikers to go directly straight across, they do wind up stymied when they get to Route 1. There's really no place to go unless you want to climb over stuff.
Yeah.
I think I have encountered that guardrail over at Route 1 myself, and I agree that some better signage along the levee trail that would better direct you into how to actually connect with the parts of the Northwest Branch Trail that actually go somewhere would be improved. But I think that that may, as you suggest, be a bit outside the city limits and the scope of what we're able to address in this plan. But it's certainly something that we can keep in mind and incorporate into suggestions for the county parks program and the Montgomery or the Maryland National Capital Parks Commission, who I believe control that part of the trail.
So I just wanted to point out that the crossing that we're talking about here is on the north side of the levee, not on the south side. I think the connections that you're talking about are on the south side of the levee rather than north, because if you continue on the trail here, you to the right, you're headed towards the nature center, and to the left, you're headed toward the West Hyattsville Metro station, connecting to the Northwest Branch Trail.
It's not always clear when you go to the left in this image how you get to that connection to the West Hyattsville Metro or the Northwest Branch Trail going towards DC. But as somebody points out in the chat, that's I think the issue that he's talking about is more about the bridge on 38th.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so this is the Chillum Road crossing, which is has its own crossing issues where you have to, if you're on the trail, you have to go down to the light at Arundel and Allison cross and then come back.
Hypothetically, yeah.
Is there time for me to ask a question for something else? On a different topic, not bike riding, but speed cameras. I think that they should be made more visible and seem less likely to try to do a gotcha. And I think there should be a use of decoy speed cameras that you can, as a driver, you can see, hey, this is a camera that wants to take a picture of me. And whether it's an expensive real operating camera or a decoy, it's going to have an effect on people. Just a thought as another way of approaching calming down the speed, because, you know, even with a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit with signs, people exceed that all the time. I know I do. The signs aren't enough. It needs to get to people's behavior. You really have to get to where they don't want to, you know, they don't want to be caught doing the wrong thing. And I think by making the cameras obvious and visible, you could get closer to that goal.
Yeah, I think the enforcement is part of the story and the cameras are part of the story. And I think also the physical design that causes the intuitive change is also a really important part. It's kind of doing both of those at the same time.
Yeah, creating the physical changes that prevent people from speeding in the first place are more effective than a camera that might send them a bill in the mail a bit later.
And finally, I'd like to second those first comments we had, the couple of comments about the problem with pass-through traffic. It's a big issue, and they're the drivers that are not local neighbors, so they care less about abiding by the speed limit. And I think a really important goal should be eliminating or reducing that drive-through traffic as much as possible. One thought I had, and where there's a major, a lot of drive-through, is on Bunker Hill coming from Eastern Avenue going over to 34th Street. And I wondered if there's any way to talk to the DC people about, as you approach from DC, Eastern Avenue, you can only turn left or right. You can't go straight across. Left turn only, right turn only. That would cause some inconvenience to local residents who live in that
From
neighborhood.
DC, you're saying from DC, as you
Yes.
cross, you would only be able to go right or left rather than
Yes.
coming straight on Bunker Hill.
In other words, towards Route 1 or towards Queens Chapel. No way that you can just go straight through, because that's the main thing about the pass-through traffic problem. And what Hannah mentioned in the first place about the intersection of Eastern and Rhode Island, if you're on Eastern headed towards Rhode Island, there's no left turn signal there. There's no left turn lane. There needs to be a turn lane and a signal, because what happens is that cuts down what could be 2 lanes going through to 1. And then you have a backup of traffic that's a half a mile or more, and you're leading people to want to cut through, find an easier, quicker way to get across. The people that need to turn left want to go north on Route 1, for instance.
Okay.
Thank you very much again for your time and your efforts.
Sure. Thank you for your feedback. We have 5 minutes to go. So I want to just end on a couple slides so that we have we can use the last few minutes for any final comments. So one thing I'll mention is that part of what kind of you can expect to see in the overall plan as we start to capture everything you heard about today is really pulling in the leadership commitment that's been shown by the mayor and the city council and their efforts in forming the task force and forming a Vision Zero policy statement and passing that. We'll be talking about the planning structure. We'll be incorporating safety analysis and then also building in the story of the engagement and collaboration that's happened in this process, but more importantly, looking forward what needs to happen in order to achieve these important safety outcomes. Equity is an important part of our work, and so we'll talk about that and highlight some of the things that we've mentioned today. The policy and process changes, the strategy and project selection, and then also a way to document progress and ensure transparency are an important part of the project. As far as next steps go, we have another task force meeting on May 25 and then council work sessions and legislative sessions at the end of May and early June. Our intention is to wrap up the document at the end of June so that the city is able to write and submit the grant submittal by July 10. And then, as I mentioned, we'll continue to work over the course of the summer on sketch concepts, kind of actually taking these design ideas one step forward, and then also providing a toolbox of really the systemic interventions that we land on as part of this project. So with that, I think we've got a few minutes to go. What I'd like to do is stop sharing my screen and then maybe give an opportunity for the city council members or Mr. Kamali to offer any final thoughts on this process and what we'll be focusing on moving forward. Mr. Kamali or Luke or Jarrett or the mayor is still here as well.
I defer to mayor and council.
Selena, did you have anything you wanted to say? If not, I can jump in. Okay. I just want to say thank you to all the residents for your comments in the chat. For those of you who spoke up, the meetings that we showed up on the screen here earlier, if you're signed up for city alerts, you will get a city alert letting you know how to join those meetings. So there are other opportunities to see what this looks like as we bring it before the mayor and council, see what we think about it. So, you'll have opportunities to provide feedback there. Big thank you to Tool Design. Just really excited about these projects and about the potential it has for transforming some areas around town, especially the areas where large apartment complexes are on the northern part of the city. I think just creating wonderful corridors that connect us to the larger bike system and the West Hyattsville Metro, just terrific job. And I just want everyone to know these projects are going to cost a lot of money. So that's why we're building the case we can to go after federal funding. There's no guarantee that we're going to get it. So there's no guarantee that these projects are going to be existing 5 years from now. But we're really going to do our best to build the best case we can to go after that funding. Even if we don't get that federal funding, we have allocated already a lot of money in our budget for FY24, and we're looking to do more from our ARPA funds so we get closer to $1 million that we have set aside to do some of this work, even if we don't get all the federal funding. So just thank you again, everyone, and looking forward to our next meetings.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Jarrett, would you like to close this out? Oh, we can't hear you. We can't quite hear you.
I think there's something going on with his mic because all I'm getting now is
yeah. Yeah, it's okay. No, sorry. Doesn't appear to be working. That's all right. Well, thank you, Jarrett. Well, I want to say thank you again to everybody for joining us and for participating today and providing really great feedback. We'll be capturing everything that came in the chat. We can make the recording of this available for anybody that wasn't able to be here, and we really encourage you to keep participating in those opportunities that are coming up over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And we really look forward to continuing to work with you all on this. So thank you again, and stay in touch and stay in tune on this project, because it's going to move quick, and we're really excited to get the outcomes that we're seeking in collaboration with you all. So thank you again. Have a good day.
Take care.
Good night, all. Or
Thank you, everyone.
afternoon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.